And political turmoil and dysfunction continues in Israel all around the country, as now those judicial reforms are at least on pause for the time being. Joining us now live from Israel, Fox News foreign affairs correspondent Trey Yinks with the latest. Trey, good to see you. You've been in the middle of all of this all weekend. What are your impressions?
Absolutely. So over the weekend, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu fired his defense minister, Yoav Gallant. And while that on its face may not seem like the largest thing that would lead to countrywide demonstrations, as we have seen over the past 48 hours, it comes amid the backdrop of ongoing protests related to proposed judicial reforms. And so many people took to the streets, tens of thousands of Israelis, over the past several weeks. But over the past 2 days, it was really a turning point in these demonstrations. The firing of the defense minister was seen as a change, a shift in energy here, and ultimately it put pressure on the Israeli leader to take a step back from what he had previously indicated would be the next step in these judicial reforms. So the votes on these reforms that were set to take place in the Israeli Knesset behind me, Israel's version of the parliament, won't take place, according to the prime minister now, until at least May, when the Knesset is back in session after the Passover holiday for Israeli lawmakers. So it's a significant win for protesters and demonstrators who took to the streets today and tried to bring together the society, but yet it is still a problem that they will face in the near future, just weeks away.
Okay, and Trey, the country has really been brought to a standstill here. So many institutions are closed, people are not in school, businesses are boycotting. And you have the rhetoric being used by Netanyahu tonight. He's using the term civil war. He wants to avoid that at all costs. This is very serious.
It's very serious indeed. And you saw today a population that is clearly concerned about the future of their country. It wasn't just protests and demonstrations taking place in large cities like Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. The airport halted all departing flights in Tel Aviv, the main airport for the Jewish state. There was a general labor strike across this country, and banks were closed. This was an effort by protesters to shut down their society in order to show the world what is happening here. And they were at least partially successful in getting these votes on the judicial reforms delayed. The larger thing to look at here, though, is the security situation. This is a state that is built around security. There is a mandatory military service. It is a country that faces threats not only internally and along its close borders with places like Gaza and the West Bank, but also countries like Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Iran. And these are all threats that the Israelis have to constantly be prepared for. They are continuously preparing for a multi-front conflict, and it's really not seen as a matter of if, but rather when. So when you have a situation like is unfolding right now, with thousands of civilians in the streets, with reserve troops from elite units and fighter pilots saying they are unwilling to serve in this country's military as a result of the proposed judicial reforms, it is a critical security situation, and it is something that was a driving factor behind the statement that Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, made over the weekend in opposition to the proposed judicial reforms, and ultimately one of the reasons why Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made that decision to force him out of his position, because he didn't see him as loyal as going with the cause of the Likud party and ultimately trying to force these judicial reforms forward through the Israeli Knesset.
Right, just lastly, what about the viability or the vulnerability of the Netanyahu government right now? Some of his coalition partners, and correct me if I'm wrong, threatened to back out. Are we seeing a possible pending collapse of the Netanyahu government?
Absolutely. New polls that were released today indicate if Prime Minister Netanyahu's Likud party ran in a new round of elections, they would lose. And that's significant because the Israeli Knesset is 120 seats. You need 61 seats in a coalition government to control Israel's version of a parliament. And it has been very difficult. Israel went to 5 rounds of elections in 3 years. So each government has really just slipped by with a few seats left to control that majority. And it puts whatever leader who is in charge in a very difficult situation, because right now it's Prime Minister Netanyahu, and he has to keep a lot of people happy in his coalition, people who have very far-right conservative views, who have extremely religious views that don't represent the whole of Israel, the population of this country. But Netanyahu will have his arm twisted by these individuals because he has to. He has to maintain this coalition government to stay in power. It allows him to try to push forward these types of laws and bills that consolidate power in this country. And it is one of those driving factors of why so many Israelis took to the streets over the past several weeks, and forcefully over the past 2 days, they faced water cannons, stun grenades, and police on horseback because they wanted to ensure that this democracy would remain.
And Trey, are they characterizing this, just lastly, as somewhat of a partial, temporary victory?
They certainly are, but they also understand what was said by the Prime Minister. Prime Minister Netanyahu has shown no intention of canceling these judicial reforms, of throwing them out. He's simply delaying the process. And any politician that you talk to in Israel who has ever worked with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will tell you the same thing. The Prime Minister historically has said something and then worked behind the scenes to get whatever suits his party and his power best. And so while he may make a promise of compromise and reform and bringing the opposition to the table, he's buying time. This is an effort by the Prime Minister to move forward with his plans for judicial reform that would consolidate power, that would end a system of checks and balances, that would ultimately make it so the government in power, the Likud party, could overrule the country's Supreme Court with a simple majority, and they could choose the country's future judges. And that's what he's trying to do. And there is no indication that he's actually going to stop that, despite the statement that was made tonight.
All right, Trey Yingst there for us in Israel. Trey, thanks so much. Great reporting. We'll talk again.
Thank you.
Okay, so right now we want to go back out to these scenes. Trey was in the middle of all these protests over the weekend and into today as we want to continue with this coverage here. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. Right now, though, we want to bring into the conversation right now to the program here Rabbi Rick Jacobs. He's the president of Union for Reform Judaism, and he joined me just last week, just last Thursday, and how things have escalated very, very quickly there in Israel. Rabbi, thanks so much for being with us. My first question to you, though, is, have you ever noticed a situation historically, I guess in the 21st century, where Bibi Netanyahu has been backed into this corner politically, so much so he has had to now change course? Is that something new?
Well, he's certainly adept at changing courses, but he's never been in a coalition like the one he had to assemble for this government. It's the most extreme, the most right-wing government Israel's ever had. It's ultra-Orthodox and it's ultra-nationalist. And frankly, you know, he had no choice today. He certainly has been frustrated in trying to figure out how to navigate all this. And yesterday, after he fired the defense minister, the eruption of voices and protests was overwhelming. So he really was forced to put a pause on the judiciary reforms, but he also had to pay a high price because, as Trey just said, holding this coalition together is a full-time job. And the most extreme voices were threatening to leave the coalition, which would, of course, collapse the government. And one of them, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's the Minister of Public Security, he said, the price for me staying in is I need to know that there will be a National Guard, which is an extra militia to be under his direct authority. So Ben-Gvir was probably one of the most problematic and disruptive figures in Israeli politics, is now in charge of a very large swath of police. So that was part of the price of holding this coalition together. And it is a very challenging set of constraints that this prime minister has going forward.
Okay, but what about Netanyahu's comments to the Israeli people just tonight? Did they, I guess, alleviate any concerns? Did they mitigate the problem? Did you watch them?
Yeah, no, I think people certainly have seen, Prime Minister Netanyahu make promises and then break them. Obviously, he's not the only politician probably on the world stage who has done that. So I don't think people were particularly I would say, kind of comforted. And the frank truth is that going forward, we have not only Passover the middle of next week, we have the Holocaust Remembrance Day, we have the 75th anniversary of Israel. And then after those observances, which are primary observances in Israel, then there will be some kind of resumption of this legislative process. And the prime minister did not say, I'm going to, for sure, make compromises. And it may well be that members of his coalition have already said this will be pushed forward in the form that it's in. So the process of negotiating, of coming up with compromises, is what the president, Isaac Herzog, wants. It's what the opposition says it wants. But it's anything but assured that there will be a genuine good faith effort to come up with a better resolution that's good for the entire population of the state of Israel.
Yeah. Let's back up just a bit if we could. Rabbi, could you explain to our viewers what these judicial reforms would do? How would they, upend Israeli democracy? Some have described them as anti-democratic. What would they do?
Well, I'll take the most dramatic one, which is the override clause, which would mean that a Supreme Court decision could be overridden by a majority of one, meaning 61 Knesset members would say, we don't like that Supreme Court decision. We now overrule it. That would weaken the Supreme Court. And again, remember, Israel does not have three branches of government to balance. The executive and the legislative, they're together. That's one branch. And then there's the Supreme Court. So the ability to defend the rights of minorities, which has been the Supreme Court's calling card over the decades of Israel's existence, would be considerably weakened. They want to also hold the majority in deciding who becomes the judges. There are also questions about the independence of the judiciary. There's a whole set of reforms. Some people will call them, revolutionary. But the truth is, across the entire judiciary, there will be a tilt towards the legislative and away from the judiciary. And that is certainly problematic in a very delicately balanced democracy like the state of Israel. In fact, a fairly young democracy, only 75 years old. Right. And I think for those who worry about the rule of law, who worry about all those things that are very delicate, these changes would, first of all, create intended, but it would also create a number of unintended consequences, which is why the president of Israel said a while ago, months ago, he said, slow it down. Yeah. What is the rush? Yeah. Let's be more deliberative. Let's be more careful. The stakes are just too high to rush this through.
Yeah, I think, observers of this here in the U.S., myself included, we try to look at this through somewhat of an American political lens. And I was reading over the weekend, Israel, to my, astonishment, has no written constitution like we do here. And that's why maybe you're seeing some of this back and forth. I was also struck by, Rabbi, how many different groups, sects of society are opposed to this. Business leaders, trade unions and labor unions as well opposed to this. Like you said, the president of Israel. And so you're seeing that ripple, and many in the military as well, which we can get to. But are there anyone out there in those hundreds of thousands of people? Are there separate, maybe counter protesters for people who do support these? Where are those protests? Are those happening?
Yeah, they're happening, but much more infrequently, and they've been much smaller and less significant. And frankly, the opposition has been spontaneous. It's been not in just Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, it's been across the country. And so you saw that outpouring. And yesterday, after the defense minister was fired, it just erupted to be even more numerous. So there is a coalition set of protests, but they're very small to date. And they, frankly, have not been carrying much of the, kind of will of the people. So this is definitely something that's ripping this society apart, and the stakes are very high. And frankly, Israel is a place where, there has been a sense of unity. Serving in the army has always been one of those unifying forces. And now when the defense minister says, I have such dissension in the ranks of the Israeli military, I can't guarantee that we would be ready in the face of an attack. That's a very serious threat to Israel.
And Rabbi, just lastly, where do we go from here? I know the reforms have been kind of shelved, put on pause. Give me some predictions here. You're not predicting a collapse of the government, new elections soon. That would be really the most drastic scenario, right?
Yeah, I don't think people today would predict the collapse of this government. For the time being, the prime minister has pieced this coalition back together. He's pulled in the most extreme voices, Itamar Ben-Gvir, the minister of public security, and Bezalel Smotrich, who is the finance minister. But the truth is, he's got a very, very small margin of error. And the groundswell of opposition is quite significant. What we're going to see is after Passover, after the Holocaust Memorial, after the Israeli Independence Day, you're going to see, I hope, people sitting down in good faith with the president of Israel as a mediator and really working to figure out, is there a way that they can create a compromise so that the society is held together and the country can move forward. But I don't think anybody looking at this is naive that is going to be simple or assured. And it could be that any stop along the way, a new challenge will come to this government, and it may be one that's overwhelming to it. So anyone who loves the state of Israel, as I do, is hoping that things can be put back together. But the truth is, these are principled discussions. These are principled dissensions, and they're not going to be papered over by a couple of speeches by any politician. They have to be worked through. I pray that they will, and that Israel will be stronger and more united afterwards, but the proof is in the pudding.
All right, Rabbi Rick Jacobs, we appreciate your insight into this major international headline today, and we'll speak again. Thanks so much.
Thank you.